Hello, friend. Welcome to Science for Sleep. Were you aware that you've been seeing flowers incorrectly your entire life? In fact, bees can see patterns that human eyes cannot. When a bee looks at a flower, it does not see only color the way we do. Many flowers carry markings in ultraviolet light, a range of light that human eyes cannot detect. To us, a petal may look plain and soft yellow. To a bee, that same petal can hold glowing pathways, gentle lines that guide the bee inward, toward nectar. Scientists have photographed these ultraviolet patterns, and they often form shapes like targets or landing strips. The flower is not silent. It is quietly signaling, in a language made of light. A honeybee's brain is smaller than a sesame seed. Inside that tiny structure are fewer than 1 million neurons, which is very small compared to the human brain. And yet, that small brain allows a bee to remember landmarks, measure distance, and return home across open land. A bee can fly several kilometers away from its hive, visiting many flowers, and still find its way back. It uses the sun as a compass. It adjusts for the slow movement of the sun across the sky. Tiny structure, steady navigation. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, you're welcome to subscribe. And if it feels natural, to leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. It helps others find their way to this calm corner of the world, one sleepy traveler at a time. The quiet continues here, just as it is. Inside a beehive, thousands of bees act like a single body. A healthy hive often holds tens of thousands of individuals. Yet the colony behaves as if it is one living system. The hive stays close to 35 degrees Celsius, even when the outside air changes. In heat, bees fan their wings to move air through the hive. In cold, they cluster together and vibrate their flight muscles to produce warmth. The temperature remains steady because the bees are not acting alone. They are responding together, guided by chemical signals called pheromones, which pass between them and help coordinate behavior. Bees also speak through movement. When a foraging bee finds a rich patch of flowers, it returns to the hive and performs what scientists call the waggle dance. The bee moves in a small figure-8 pattern. The angle of the straight waggle portion tells the other bees which direction to fly in relation to the sun. The length of that waggle tells them how far they must travel. Distance becomes time. Direction becomes angle. Inside the dim interior of the hive, other bees feel the vibration of this movement through the honeycomb walls. Honey itself begins as thin nectar. Nectar collected from flowers is mostly water, often more than 70%. Back in the hive, bees pass the nectar from one to another, adding enzymes that break down complex sugars into simpler ones. Then they fan their wings to evaporate the extra water. As the water content drops below about 18%, the liquid becomes thick and stable. At that point, it resists bacteria and mold. Honey is preserved sweetness. Flower nectar, gently changed and stored for colder months. More than 20,000 species of bees live on Earth. Some live in large colonies, like honeybees. Many live alone. Some nest in hollow stems. Others dig small tunnels in the soil. Their bodies are built from chitin, a strong material that forms an outer shell called an exoskeleton. Their eyes are made of thousands of tiny lenses, which together create a mosaic image of the world. Their wings beat around 200 times each second, moving air in small, steady pulses that create the soft sound we call a buzz. In warm air above a field of flowers, that sound is not loud. It is a gentle vibration, carried only a short distance. A bee moves from bloom to bloom, guided by patterns of light we cannot see, carrying dust-like grains of pollen that help plants form seeds and fruit. Its body is small. Its work is constant. Its presence is often unnoticed unless we choose to look closely. And when we do look closely, we begin to see that the world around us is layered with signals, movement, and quiet cooperation. The air holds more than stillness. It holds wings in motion, sunlight reflected in ultraviolet lines, and tiny brains solving the problem of distance without effort. Bees have been moving through fields and forests for millions of years. They existed long before humans learned to farm or build cities. Their flight is not rushed. It is steady. Their systems are not loud. They are precise. Even now, somewhere beyond the walls around you, a bee may be tracing a path from flower to flower, guided by light and memory, carrying sweetness back toward a hive that remains warm and balanced. Small bodies, vast coordination, and this is only the beginning of what they are. Now, when we shift from what bees see to what they are, the image becomes closer, steadier. A bee's body is divided into three main parts: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. This simple structure is shared by all insects. The head holds the tools for sensing the world. The thorax carries the muscles that power movement. The abdomen stores many of the internal systems that keep the bee alive. Each part connects smoothly to the next, forming a compact, balanced shape that is both light and strong. The outer surface of a bee is not soft like human skin. It is made of chitin, a durable material that forms an exoskeleton. This outer shell supports the bee's body and protects its internal organs. Because bees do not have internal bones, the exoskeleton serves as both shield and structure. It also helps prevent water loss, which is important for such a small creature moving through warm air. If you were to look closely at a bee's head, you would notice two large compound eyes. Each compound eye is made up of thousands of tiny units called ommatidia. Instead of forming one single image the way human eyes do, these small units each detect light from slightly different angles. The result is a mosaic-like picture of the world. This type of vision is especially good at detecting movement, which helps bees stay aware of shifting light, moving petals, or approaching danger. Between the compound eyes are three smaller simple eyes called ocelli. These do not form detailed images. Instead, they help the bee sense light intensity and maintain stability during flight. Together, the compound eyes and the ocelli allow the bee to respond quickly to changes in brightness and direction. Extending from the front of the head are two antennae. These slender structures are rich with sensory cells. A bee's antennae can detect chemical signals in the air, including floral scents and pheromones released by other bees. They also sense touch and airflow. When a bee moves its antennae gently from side to side, it is gathering information about its surroundings, much like we might notice subtle shifts in temperature or smell. The thorax, which sits just behind the head, is the center of movement. Inside the thorax are powerful flight muscles. Though a bee's wings are thin and delicate, The muscles that move them are surprisingly strong for the bee's size. The thorax also anchors the bee's 6 legs. Each leg is jointed, allowing for flexible movement as the bee grips petals, walks across surfaces, or gathers pollen. On the hind legs of many bees, especially honeybees, there are specialized structures called pollen baskets, or corbiculae. These slightly concave areas are surrounded by stiff hairs. When a bee brushes against a flower, pollen grains cling to the fine hairs covering its body. The bee then combs the pollen toward these baskets, packing it into small golden bundles that can be carried back to the hive. The pollen itself is made up of tiny grains containing plant reproductive cells, and it serves as a primary source of protein for developing larvae. The abdomen, the final section of the bee's body, contains many essential systems. Inside are the digestive organs that process nectar and pollen. The abdomen also houses wax glands in worker bees. These glands secrete small flakes of beeswax, which are later shaped into the hexagonal cells of the honeycomb. At the end of the abdomen lies the stinger in certain bees, a modified egg-laying structure used for defense. The bee's entire body is covered in fine branched hairs. These hairs are not simply decoration. They increase the surface area of the bee, helping pollen grains stick through electrostatic attraction. As a bee flies, friction between its body and the air can create a slight electric charge. Flowers often carry a small opposite charge, which causes pollen to leap gently toward the bee when it approaches. From head to abdomen, from antenna to wing base, the structure of a bee is precise and efficient. Nothing is oversized. Nothing is wasted. Each segment supports a role, and each role supports the colony. Seen from a distance, a bee may appear small and simple, but when viewed closely, its body reveals careful design shaped by millions of years of evolution. Light enters thousands of lenses. Air moves across chitin. Muscles contract within the thorax. Pollen gathers in soft golden clusters. The form itself tells a quiet story of adaptation. And with this image held steady, the next gentle shift becomes easier to imagine. How that compact structure lifts into motion, and how wings thin as paper can carry such steady flight. And when that compact structure begins to move, the air around it begins to change. A bee's wings are thin, almost transparent, stretched with delicate veins that branch like fine lines in a leaf. There are 2 pairs of wings, one larger pair in front and a slightly smaller pair behind. When the bee prepares for flight, tiny hooks along the edges of these wings link them together. Once connected, the wings function as a single surface, moving in smooth coordination. The motion itself is fast, far faster than it appears from a distance. A honeybee beats its wings around 200 times each second. That number is easy to hear, but difficult to picture. 200 movements in 1 second means the wings are moving back and forth in a blur, too fast for the human eye to follow clearly. What we see instead is a soft shimmer around the bee's body. What we hear is the gentle buzz created by the vibration of air. The sound of a bee is not a voice. It is air being moved rapidly. As the wings beat, they push downward and slightly backward. This motion creates lift, the upward force that allows the bee to rise. For many years, scientists believed bees should not be able to fly using simple models of aerodynamics. but high-speed cameras revealed that bees create swirling air patterns called vortices above their wings. These small spirals of moving air help generate enough lift to keep the bee suspended. Flight for a bee is not gliding. It is constant motion. Inside the thorax, large flight muscles contract and relax in rapid cycles. Unlike human muscles, which attach directly to the structures they move, a bee's flight muscles deform the thorax itself. As the thorax changes shape slightly with each contraction, the wings are pulled up and down automatically. This system allows for very fast wing beats without requiring each movement to be directly controlled. The bee's body tilts gently to change direction. To move forward, the bee angles its body slightly downward, adjusting the stroke of its wings. To hover in place, it keeps its body more upright. When landing, it slows its wing beats and extends its legs forward, making soft contact with the surface of a flower. These adjustments happen in fractions of a second, guided by visual and sensory feedback. Even the small hairs along the bee's body play a role during flight. As the bee moves through the air, friction builds a slight static electric charge on its surface. This charge helps attract pollen grains from flowers. In experiments, scientists have observed pollen grains jumping toward a bee just before contact, drawn by opposite electrical charges. Flight does more than move the bee. It prepares the bee to gather. Bees are also able to fly in cooler temperatures than many other insects. Their flight muscles generate heat as they contract. Before takeoff, a bee can vibrate its wings without lifting off, warming its thorax until it reaches an optimal temperature for flight. This process is similar to shivering in mammals. By warming the muscles first, the bee ensures that its wings can move at full speed once airborne. From a distance, a bee crossing a meadow may seem light and effortless, but the physics of that movement is steady and exact. Air pressure shifts around the wings. Muscles pulse within the thorax. The sun's position provides orientation. The compound eyes detect motion and color below. Every second of flight is a balance between gravity, pulling downward, and lift pushing upward. A bee rarely flies in a straight line for long. Instead, it follows a slightly curved path, adjusting for wind, obstacles, and new information. When searching for flowers, it may perform looping patterns across an area, increasing the chance of discovering nectar sources. When returning to the hive, the flight becomes more direct, guided by memory and solar position. In warm afternoon light, the movement is steady. Wings hum. Petals sway as air is displaced. The bee rises, pauses, dips, and lands again. All of this is carried by surfaces thinner than paper and muscles no larger than a grain of rice. The air itself becomes part of the system, shaped by motion, carrying vibration outward in soft waves. And with wings moving in rhythms too fast to see clearly, the quiet buzz across a field becomes easier to understand. Not as noise, but as the sound of air in motion, held briefly between earth and sky. And as those wings carry the bee forward, the world it moves through is not the same world we see. Light falls across a field in many layers. Some wavelengths are visible to human eyes. Others pass unnoticed. Bees are sensitive to ultraviolet light, which sits just beyond the violet edge of the human visual range. Where we see a simple white or yellow petal, a bee may see dark lines and bright centers that form clear guides toward nectar. These ultraviolet patterns are often shaped like arrows or rings, leading inward. Scientists have photographed flowers through ultraviolet filters, revealing these hidden markings that help direct pollinators with quiet precision. The bee's compound eyes are designed for this type of perception. Each eye contains thousands of ommatidia, small visual units that each capture a narrow slice of light. Together, they create a broad field of view. Bees cannot see fine detail the way humans can, but they are very good at detecting motion and contrast. Rapid shifts in brightness stand out clearly. Moving shapes against a background are easy to detect. This makes it easier for a bee to navigate through branches, grasses, and open air without collision. Bees also perceive polarized light. Sunlight becomes partially polarized as it scatters through Earth's atmosphere. Even when the sun is hidden behind clouds, patterns of polarization remain in the sky. Bees can detect these patterns, using them as a compass. Special cells in the compound eyes respond to the orientation of polarized light waves, helping the bee maintain direction during flight. This ability allows navigation even on overcast days, when the sun itself is not visible. Color perception for bees is different from ours. Bees see blue, green, and ultraviolet well, but they do not see red clearly. A red flower may appear darker or less distinct. Many flowers that rely on bees for pollination tend to reflect strongly in blue or ultraviolet ranges. This is not random. Over millions of years, flowering plants and pollinators have influenced each other's development. Visual signals evolved alongside the eyes that could detect them. Scent is equally important. A bee's antennae are filled with sensory receptors that detect chemical molecules in the air. When a bee approaches a flower, it senses the specific scent compounds released by that plant. These chemical signals can indicate nectar availability or help distinguish one flower species from another. Inside the hive, pheromones released by the queen help regulate worker behavior and maintain colony stability. A subtle change in scent can signal danger, food, or the presence of a new queen. Touch also guides perception. Fine hairs along the bee's body respond to air movement. These hairs allow the bee to sense wind direction and subtle turbulence. When landing on a petal, the bee's legs and antennae gather information about texture and stability. Even vibration plays a role. Some flowers release pollen only when shaken at specific frequencies. Bees can produce a rapid vibration known as buzz pollination, gripping the flower and vibrating their flight muscles to dislodge pollen. The sound is soft, but the effect is precise. The bee's world, then, is layered with signals we rarely notice. Ultraviolet markings shimmer where we see plain color. Polarized light maps direction across the sky. Scents drift invisibly between petals. Air currents press gently against sensory hairs. Vibrations travel through flower stems and honeycomb walls. Inside this layered field of information, the bee moves steadily. Its brain, though small, integrates these sensory inputs in coordinated ways. Neural circuits respond to patterns of light, scent, and motion. Experiments have shown that bees can learn to associate specific colors or scents with food rewards. They can even remember simple spatial arrangements. Their perception is not random. It is shaped by experience and reinforced through repetition. From above, A meadow may appear still, but from within it, the scene is alive with cues. A bright ultraviolet center cools quietly. A familiar scent drifts across warm air. The angle of light shifts as the sun moves westward. The bee does not see confusion. It sees guidance. And as wings continue their steady rhythm, each movement is informed by this hidden landscape of light and scent. The field is not only flowers and stems. It is a map written in wavelengths and molecules readable to those equipped to sense it. In that layered quiet, perception itself becomes motion. As the bee moves through light and scent, there is another layer of organization waiting beyond the field. The hive is not simply a shelter. It is a living system made of many bodies working together in steady rhythm. A single honeybee colony can contain 20,000 to 60,000 individuals during peak season. From a distance, the hive may look like a wooden box or a hollow tree cavity, but inside, it is warm and structured. Wax comb hangs in parallel sheets, each one built from repeating hexagonal cells. Between these sheets, bees move in careful patterns, brushing past one another, exchanging food, scent, and information. Scientists often describe a honeybee colony as a superorganism. This means the colony functions as if it were one large body, rather than many separate insects. No single worker bee understands the entire plan, yet the collective behavior creates stability. Temperature is regulated, food is stored, larvae are fed, threats are addressed. The system adapts without central command in the way we might imagine it. Communication inside the hive is largely chemical. Bees release pheromones, which are signaling molecules detected by the antennae of other bees. The queen produces a specific pheromone that helps maintain social order. When her scent is strong and evenly distributed, workers remain calm and focused on their tasks. If her pheromone weakens, it can trigger the creation of new queen cells. The hive responds to shifts in chemistry, the way a body responds to changes in hormone levels. Physical contact is also constant. As bees pass each other in narrow spaces between combs, they exchange small amounts of food in a process called trophallaxis. This shared feeding spreads nutrients and chemical information throughout the colony. Through these exchanges, the hive maintains internal balance. Energy flows from foragers to nurses. Signals pass from one individual to another without interruption. The temperature inside a healthy hive remains close to 35 degrees Celsius, which is essential for developing larvae. Worker bees monitor this temperature carefully. If it rises too high, they fan their wings to circulate air through the hive. If it drops, they cluster together and vibrate their flight muscles to generate heat. The brood area, where eggs and larvae develop, must remain stable. A difference of just a few degrees can affect growth. The hive's warmth is not accidental. It is maintained through coordinated effort. Sound within the hive is subtle. There is a low, steady hum created by thousands of wings and bodies moving. Vibrations travel through the wax comb, allowing bees to sense activity even in darkness. The interior of the hive is dim, lit only by small openings. Vision plays a lesser role here. Touch, scent, and vibration become primary guides. Roles within the hive are distributed but flexible. Most of the colony is made up of worker bees, all female. They perform different tasks as they age. Younger workers clean cells and tend to larvae. Middle-aged workers build comb and store nectar. Older workers forage outside the hive. This age-based division of labor ensures that the most physically demanding tasks, like foraging, are performed by bees nearing the end of their lifespan. The hive is always adjusting. If food stores become low, more workers shift toward foraging. If brood increases, more bees remain inside to feed larvae. These changes are not directed by a leader issuing commands. Instead, they arise from local interactions. A bee responds to the cues directly around it: temperature, scent, contact frequency, and these small responses add up to large patterns. Seen from above, a colony may appear busy. Seen from within, it is balanced. Wax cells hold honey, pollen, or developing young. Workers move in repeating pathways. The queen, usually longer-bodied than other bees, continues laying eggs in empty cells, sometimes up to 2,000 per day during peak season. Her movement is steady, accompanied by attendants who feed and groom her. The hive breathes, in a sense. Air flows in through small entrances. Warmth gathers at the center. Cool currents move outward. Moisture is controlled through fanning and evaporation. Each bee contributes a small part to maintaining this internal environment. Outside, the meadow remains open and bright. Inside, the hive hums in dim amber light, a coordinated system built not of steel or stone, but of bodies responding to one another in quiet loops of feedback. Many individuals, one functioning whole. And within that whole, certain roles hold special importance, beginning with the presence of a single egg-laying center that shapes the future of the colony. Within the steady warmth of the hive, there is one body whose movement shapes the future of all the others. At the center of the colony's biological rhythm is the queen. She is not larger in number, only larger in form. Her abdomen is longer than that of the workers, tapering gently as she moves across the honeycomb. Where a worker pauses to clean or feed, the queen pauses to lay. Her primary role is continuity. Each egg she places into a wax cell carries the potential of a new body, another small part of the larger whole. During peak spring and early summer, a healthy queen can lay up to 2,000 eggs in a single day. That number is quiet, but immense. 2,000 small white eggs, each about the size of a grain of rice, placed carefully into separate cells. The process is steady. The queen lowers her abdomen into an empty cell and deposits a single egg at its base. Then she moves to the next. The eggs themselves are simple at first. Whether an egg becomes a worker, a queen, or a drone depends on fertilization and feeding. The queen has the ability to control whether an egg is fertilized. Inside her body is a specialized organ called the spermatheca, where sperm collected during her single mating period is stored. When she lays an egg, she may release sperm to fertilize it. Fertilized eggs develop into female bees, which can become workers or, under certain feeding conditions, new queens. Unfertilized eggs develop into male bees called drones. This system is known as haplodiploidy. Fertilized eggs contain 2 sets of chromosomes, one from the queen and one from a drone. Unfertilized eggs contain only 1 set from the queen alone. This genetic structure shapes the entire colony. It determines not only sex, but patterns of relatedness that influence cooperation. The queen herself begins life like any other fertilized egg. What sets her apart is diet. Larvae that are chosen to become queens are fed exclusively on a substance called royal jelly. Royal jelly is produced by young worker bees and is rich in proteins and nutrients. Continuous feeding of royal jelly triggers developmental changes. The future queen grows larger, develops functional ovaries, and matures into the egg-laying center of the hive. Her role is not to command in the way humans might imagine. The queen does not issue instructions. Instead, she produces pheromones, chemical signals that spread through the hive as workers touch and feed one another. These pheromones help maintain social stability. When the queen's scent is strong and evenly distributed, worker bees remain sterile and focused on their tasks. If the scent weakens, it can signal that the colony needs a new queen. In this way, regulation happens through chemistry. The queen's pheromones also help organize the colony's behavior. They influence foraging activity and suppress the development of new queens unless conditions require it. The presence of her scent is like a steady background signal, indicating that reproduction is accounted for. Despite her importance, the queen is not isolated. She is attended by a small group of workers who feed her, groom her, and clear space for her as she moves across the comb. These attendants form a loose circle around her, passing food through trophallaxis and spreading her pheromones further throughout the hive. As she lays eggs, they prepare cells ahead of her, ensuring that empty space is available. Her lifespan is also different from that of workers. While a summer worker may live around 6 weeks, a queen can live several years under healthy conditions. Over that time, she may lay hundreds of thousands, even millions of eggs. Each egg adds another thread to the colony's fabric. The brood area, where eggs and developing larvae are clustered, remains carefully maintained at about 35 degrees Celsius. Workers monitor this zone closely, adjusting airflow and clustering behavior to keep conditions stable. The queen moves within this warm center, laying in concentric patterns that expand and contract with the seasons. In spring, egg production rises. In late autumn, it slows. The pace of laying responds to food availability and daylight length. Even the queen's activity reflects environmental signals passed through the colony. Within the dim amber light of the hive, the process continues without noise or ceremony. An egg is placed. A worker seals another cell. Warmth is preserved. Pheromones circulate. One body lays. Many bodies respond. And as those eggs hatch into larvae, and those larvae grow into workers, the steady rhythm of tasks begins to shift with age, drawing each new bee into a changing role within the living system. As those eggs settle into their wax cells and begin to develop, time inside the hive takes on a different rhythm. A worker bee's life is not defined by a single task. It is defined by change. When a fertilized egg hatches, a small larva emerges, white and curved, resting at the base of its cell. For several days, it is fed by nurse bees, receiving a mixture of pollen and nectar known as bee bread. The temperature around it remains close to 35 degrees Celsius, maintained carefully by the surrounding workers. After several molts, the larva spins a cocoon and enters the pupal stage. Within that sealed cell, transformation continues quietly until a fully formed worker bee emerges. From the moment she chews her way out of the wax cap, her duties begin. Young worker bees, often called house bees at this stage, start with the simplest but most essential tasks. During the first days of life, they clean empty cells, preparing them for new eggs. Cleanliness is critical inside the hive. A single neglected cell could harbor mold or bacteria. The cleaning phase ensures that the brood area remains healthy and ready. As the worker ages slightly, her role shifts. Around 3 to 10 days old, she becomes a nurse bee. Nurse bees feed developing larvae with secretions produced from glands in their heads. These secretions include royal jelly for selected larvae and protein-rich mixtures for others. During this phase, the worker remains close to the brood nest, responding to the subtle vibrations and chemical cues released by hungry larvae. Feeding is frequent and precise. Around the second week of life, the worker's glands that produce royal jelly begin to shrink. At the same time, wax-producing glands on her abdomen become more active. Now she may help build honeycomb, secreting tiny flakes of wax and shaping them into hexagonal cells. Other workers join her, warming and molding the wax with their mandibles. This stage may also include storing nectar, packing pollen, and guarding the hive entrance. Guard bees use their antennae to detect unfamiliar scents, distinguishing members of their colony from outsiders. As the worker reaches roughly 2 to 3 weeks of age, another shift occurs. Her flight muscles are fully developed. Her sensory systems are tuned to the outside world. Now she becomes a forager. Foragers leave the hive to collect nectar, pollen, water, and plant resins used to make propolis. This stage is the most physically demanding and also the most dangerous. Predators, weather, and distance all pose risks. The average lifespan of a summer worker bee is about 6 weeks. Because foraging is energy intensive, many workers spend only the last portion of their life outside the hive. Their wings gradually wear down from constant flight. The edges fray, muscles tire. The life of a summer worker is short but efficient. Winter workers live differently. Bees that emerge in late autumn may live several months. They do not forage. Instead, they remain inside the hive, conserving energy and helping maintain the warm winter cluster. Their bodies store more fat reserves, and their metabolism slows. These long-lived workers sustain the colony through cold months until spring returns. The shifts in role are not random. Hormonal changes inside the bee guide these transitions. Levels of juvenile hormone rise as a worker ages, influencing behavior and readiness to forage. Environmental conditions can also adjust timing. If many foragers are lost, younger bees may begin foraging earlier than usual. The system remains flexible. Inside the hive, this flow of age-based labor creates balance. Young bees remain near the center, where brood requires warmth and attention. Older bees move outward, eventually crossing the threshold into open air. The colony maintains order without instruction, guided by biology and local cues. From the outside, one might see only movement at the entrance. But inside, a sequence unfolds quietly. A bee cleans, another feeds, another shapes wax. Another stands at the doorway, sensing airflow and scent. Later, that same bee may cross into sunlight for the first time, navigating toward distant flowers. Time passes in layers. The worker does not choose her path. It unfolds within her, guided by development and need. And while the majority of the colony follows this shifting pattern of labor, there are others whose lives follow a very different path, shaped not by task rotation, but by a single purpose that leads them upward into open sky. As most workers settle into their changing rhythm of tasks, there are others within the hive whose path moves in only one direction. These are the drones. A drone begins as an unfertilized egg, laid by the queen, without the addition of stored sperm. Because of this, drones carry only one set of chromosomes, all from the queen. Their genetic structure is different from that of workers and queens, who develop from fertilized eggs. This difference shapes their form and their role. Physically, drones are larger and more rounded than workers. Their bodies appear thicker through the thorax, and their eyes are especially large. In fact, a drone's compound eyes meet at the top of his head, giving him a wide field of vision. This expanded vision is not for finding flowers. It is for locating queens in open air. Drones do not collect nectar. They do not gather pollen. They do not build wax comb or guard the hive entrance. Their sole biological role is reproduction. During late spring and summer, when new queens may emerge from developing colonies, drones take flight. They leave the hive and travel to specific gathering areas known as drone congregation zones. These zones are open spaces, often above clearings or along landscape features, where drones from many colonies gather in loose groups. Scientists have observed that these locations remain consistent year after year, though how drones learn them is still being studied. When a virgin queen leaves her hive for her mating flight, she flies toward one of these congregation zones. The sky becomes the meeting place. Drones pursue the queen mid-air. Flight speed increases. Precision matters. A successful mating occurs at height, often several meters above ground. The drone transfers sperm to the queen in a brief moment of contact. Immediately afterward, the drone dies. The act of mating causes fatal injury, as part of the reproductive organ remains attached to the queen. The queen, however, survives. She may mate with multiple drones during this single mating period, storing their sperm in her spermatheca. After this, she returns to her hive and rarely leaves again, except during swarming. The genetic diversity gathered during that flight supports the health and resilience of the colony she will lead. Drones that do not mate continue to live within the hive for a time. They are fed by workers and move freely through the comb. Because they do not forage or build, they rely entirely on the labor of others. During periods of abundant nectar, this arrangement continues without tension. The colony supports them. But as summer fades and food becomes less certain, the atmosphere inside the hive shifts. In late autumn, workers begin to prevent drones from feeding. They block access to honey stores. Eventually, drones are pushed toward the entrance and expelled. Without the ability to gather food for themselves, they do not survive long outside the hive. This seasonal removal ensures that precious winter resources are reserved for workers and the queen. The drone's life is brief and singular. From emergence to flight, from congregation zone to sky, the path is narrow. Yet it plays a vital role in maintaining genetic flow between colonies. Without drones, queens could not gather the diversity needed for strong worker populations. The design of the drone's body reflects this purpose. Large eyes help detect motion in open air. Strong flight muscles support rapid pursuit. The absence of a stinger reflects a lack of defensive role. Even their presence within the hive is temporary, expanding in warm months and disappearing as cold approaches. Above the meadow, in warm light, drones rise into open space. Their flight is less directed than that of foraging workers. They do not move from flower to flower. They circle and hover in zones shaped by wind and terrain. Their attention is fixed upward, scanning for the form of a queen. Below, inside the hive, waxcomb holds developing brood and stored honey. Workers move steadily through narrow corridors. The queen continues laying. Above, brief encounters shape the next generation. When the mating season passes and the sky grows quieter, the hive returns its focus inward. With drones gone and winter approaching, the interior structure becomes central once again. Wax cells, carefully shaped and aligned, hold the food that will sustain the colony through colder months. The open sky gives way to the ordered geometry within. With the open sky quieting and the drones gone, attention settles once more inside the hive, where structure holds everything in place. Hanging from the ceiling of the hive are sheets of honeycomb, pale at first, then deepening to amber as they are used and reused. Each sheet is made of repeating hexagons, fitted tightly together with no gaps between them. From a distance, the pattern appears simple. Up close, it reveals careful precision. Beeswax is the material that forms this structure. Worker bees produce wax from special glands on the underside of their abdomen. When a worker is about 12 to 18 days old, these wax glands are most active. Tiny flakes of wax, almost like small scales, emerge from narrow openings. The worker uses her hind legs to collect these flakes and passes them forward to her mouthparts. There, she chews the wax, warming it and shaping it into pliable pieces. Construction begins in warm conditions. Inside the hive, the temperature must remain close to 35 degrees Celsius for wax to be workable. Bees cluster together to maintain this warmth, especially during active building. As wax softens, workers press it into place, extending existing comb downward in smooth sheets. The choice of hexagon is not random. Among all shapes that can tile a flat surface without gaps, the hexagon uses the least amount of material to enclose the greatest amount of space. Mathematicians have shown that this shape minimizes perimeter while maximizing storage area. In simple terms, hexagons allow bees to store more honey and brood using less wax. Wax itself requires significant energy to produce. To create 1 kilogram of wax, bees must consume several kilograms of honey. Because wax is costly, efficiency matters. The shared walls between adjacent hexagons reduce material use. Each cell wall supports 2 neighboring cells, strengthening the structure while conserving resources. The cells are not perfectly flat at the base. If you look closely, the base of each honeycomb cell forms a 3-sided pyramid shape composed of rhombus-like facets. This design strengthens the comb and distributes weight evenly. Honey stored within the cells can be heavy. A single full frame in a managed hive can weigh several kilograms. The geometry must support this load without collapsing. Cells are also built with a slight upward tilt. The angle is small, about 13 degrees above horizontal. This tilt helps prevent liquid honey from spilling out before it thickens. Once the honey has reached the correct moisture level, workers seal the cell with a thin wax cap, creating a stable, enclosed store. Not all cells are identical. Worker brood cells are smaller. Drone brood cells are slightly larger. Queen cells, built vertically and shaped like elongated peanuts, are constructed separately when needed. The comb is not random repetition. It is organized by purpose. Air moves freely between the sheets of comb. The spacing between parallel combs is consistent, usually about 6 to 9 millimeters. This gap, often called bee space, allows workers to move comfortably between surfaces without filling the area with wax. If the gap is smaller, bees seal it with propolis. If larger, they build additional comb. The hive maintains this spacing with remarkable consistency. Within these hexagonal chambers, life unfolds. Some cells hold eggs and larvae. Others hold pollen packed into dense layers. Many hold honey in various stages of processing. Workers move from cell to cell, inspecting, cleaning, and capping. From the outside, honeycomb may appear decorative. Inside, it is functional architecture shaped by instinct and collective behavior. No single bee holds a blueprint. Yet through local interactions, each worker responding to the edge of a cell, to the warmth of the cluster, to the presence of nearby wax, the pattern emerges. Experiments have shown that even when bees begin with irregular shapes, surface tension and the warmth of clustered bodies help the wax settle into hexagonal form. What begins as circular impressions gradually reshapes into straight-edge cells as the wax softens and tension equalizes. The structure grows downward over time. As the colony expands in spring, new comb is added. As nectar flows in summer, cells fill and are sealed. In autumn, brood areas shrink, and honey stores become central. Within the dim amber glow of the hive, geometry supports survival. Hexagon beside hexagon, wall beside wall, each edge meeting another without waste. The structure holds warmth, brood, and sweetness. It holds memory of seasons past. It holds the quiet labor of thousands of mandibles shaping soft wax into repeating form. And within those small chambers, liquid gathered from distant flowers begins its slow transformation, thickening from thin nectar into something stable and enduring. Within those hexagonal chambers, something subtle begins to change. What enters the hive as thin nectar does not remain that way for long. When a foraging bee visits a flower, it extends a long, straw-like tongue called a proboscis into the flower's nectary. Nectar flows upward into a special storage sac inside the bee's abdomen known as the honey stomach. This sac is separate from the bee's true stomach. The nectar is not yet food for the bee itself. It is cargo. Fresh nectar is mostly water. Depending on the plant species, nectar can be 70 to 80% water, with the rest made up of sugars, primarily sucrose, along with small amounts of glucose and fructose. In this diluted form, nectar would ferment quickly if stored without change. It must be transformed. When the forager returns to the hive, she passes the nectar to a house bee through mouth-to-mouth exchange. During this transfer, enzymes begin their quiet work. One important enzyme is called invertase. Invertase breaks down sucrose, a complex sugar, into two simpler sugars, glucose and fructose. This process makes the mixture more stable and easier to store. Other enzymes contribute small changes that affect flavor, aroma, and preservation. The nectar moves from bee to bee in small droplets, exposed to air repeatedly during each exchange. As the nectar circulates, water begins to evaporate. Worker bees deposit thin layers of nectar into open cells of the honeycomb. They spread it across the surface, increasing the area exposed to air. Then they fan their wings steadily, creating airflow across the comb. The sound is soft but constant. This airflow encourages moisture to leave the liquid. The water content slowly drops. From 70 or 80%, it decreases toward 18% or lower. At this concentration, the sugar solution becomes thick and dense. High sugar concentration creates an environment where bacteria and yeast struggle to grow. Without enough water, microbial life cannot thrive. Honey becomes naturally resistant to spoilage. Scientists have found jars of honey in ancient tombs that remain preserved for thousands of years. The stability comes from its low water content, its acidity, and the presence of small amounts of hydrogen peroxide produced through enzymatic reactions. These properties combine to create a substance that resists decay. As the nectar thickens, its color deepens. Different flowers produce nectars with varying mineral and pigment content. Clover honey may appear light and pale. Buckwheat honey can be dark and amber. The taste and aroma shift depending on the floral source. Each cell holds a record of the landscape where it was gathered. Once the honey reaches the correct moisture level, worker bees seal the cell with a thin cap of wax. This cap protects the contents from absorbing moisture from the air. The sealed cell becomes a storage unit, a reserve for times when flowers are scarce. In winter, when foraging stops, the colony survives by consuming these stores. The transformation from nectar to honey is gradual. There is no sudden change. Instead, thousands of small adjustments accumulate. Enzymes break bonds. Air removes water. Temperature remains steady near 35 degrees Celsius, supporting evaporation. The open cells glisten at first, reflecting light in small ripples. Later, the surface thickens, holding shape when disturbed. Inside the hive, this process continues day after day. A forager returns with diluted sweetness gathered from distant blossoms. House bees receive it, modify it, spread it thin. Wings move, air flows. Moisture rises invisibly into the warm interior space. The liquid shifts from thin to viscous, from fragile to stable, from something that would spoil within days to something that can endure for seasons. If you were to tilt a frame of fresh nectar, it would drip easily. A frame of finished honey holds firm, the surface resisting movement. The change is chemical and physical, guided by enzymes and evaporation. Outside, flowers bloom and fade. Inside, their gathered essence thickens and rests in geometric chambers. What began as sunlight stored in plant sugars becomes preserved fuel for colder months. And as those cells fill and are sealed, another golden substance moves through the hive as well, carried on legs and clinging to fine hairs, providing not sweetness but protein and growth. As the sealed cells of honey rest in quiet rows, another golden substance moves steadily through the hive, lighter in weight but just as essential. This is pollen. If nectar is the colony's source of carbohydrates, pollen is its primary source of protein. Without pollen, larvae cannot grow properly. Muscles cannot form. Glands cannot develop. Pollen carries the nutrients needed to build new bodies. When a bee lands on a flower, it does more than sip nectar. Its body is covered in fine, branched hairs. As it brushes against the flower's anthers, tiny grains of pollen cling to those hairs. Each pollen grain contains the male reproductive cells of the plant. To the human eye, pollen may appear as soft dust. Under magnification, each grain reveals a detailed outer shell with ridges and textures unique to its species. As the bee moves from flower to flower, pollen accumulates across its body. Static electricity plays a role in this transfer. As a bee flies, friction between its body and the air can create a slight positive electrical charge. Many flowers carry a slight negative charge. When the bee approaches, pollen grains can leap gently across the small gap before contact, drawn by opposite charges. The effect is subtle but measurable. Once enough pollen has gathered, the bee begins to groom itself. Using its legs like combs, it brushes pollen from its body toward the hind legs. On the outer surface of each hind leg is a specialized structure called a pollen basket, or corbicula. This basket is bordered by stiff hairs that help hold the pollen in place. The bee packs the pollen into compact pellets, sometimes mixing it with a small amount of nectar to help it stick together. The pellets are often visible as bright yellow or orange bundles attached to the bee's legs. The color varies depending on the plant source. Some pollen appears pale cream. Others are deep red or greenish. Each pellet represents dozens of flower visits. When the bee returns to the hive, it does not store pollen the same way it stores honey. Workers remove the pellets and pack the pollen tightly into empty cells near the brood area. They compress it in layers and add a small amount of nectar and enzymes. This mixture undergoes slight fermentation, creating what is known as bee bread. The fermentation process helps preserve the pollen and makes its nutrients more digestible. Larvae are fed a mixture of bee bread and secretions from nurse bees. Protein from pollen supports rapid growth during the larval stage. In only a few days, a larva increases dramatically in size, consuming food almost constantly. Without adequate pollen stores, brood development slows and the colony's population may decline. Different plant species produce pollen with different nutrient profiles. Some pollens are rich in certain amino acids. Others contain varying levels of fats and minerals. Bees often forage from multiple plant sources to create a balanced diet. In landscapes with diverse flowering plants, colonies tend to remain healthier due to varied nutrition. The act of collecting pollen also shapes the landscape. As bees move pollen from one flower to another, they enable fertilization. The pollen grain lands on a compatible stigma and grows a tube that allows plant reproduction to occur. Seeds form, fruits develop. The cycle continues. Inside the hive, pollen storage areas are often ringed around the brood nest. Honey may be stored farther from the center, while pollen remains close to developing larvae. This arrangement ensures that protein-rich food is easily accessible where it is most needed. If you were to look closely at a frame heavy with pollen stores, you would see cells filled with muted, earthy colors. Not glossy like honey, but matte and compact. Each cell represents a journey through petals and air. The fine dust that clung to a bee's hairs now rests in ordered chambers, waiting to nourish the next generation. While honey provides energy for flight and warmth, pollen builds structure within growing bodies. Carbohydrates fuel movement, proteins build form, and as workers carry both nectar and pollen through the hive, communication continues quietly between them. Sometimes through scent, sometimes through movement, shaping where others will fly next. Inside the dim interior of the hive, where light barely reaches between the combs, movement becomes language. There is no sky visible here, no flowers, no horizon. And yet, direction is shared with remarkable precision. When a foraging worker returns after finding a rich source of nectar or pollen, she does not simply unload her cargo and leave again. She begins to move in a specific pattern across the vertical surface of the honeycomb. This movement is known as the waggle dance. The dance forms a loose figure-8 shape. In the center of that pattern is a straight run, during which the bee vibrates her abdomen from side to side. This is the waggle portion. It is brief, steady, and repeated multiple times as she loops back and begins again. The angle of that straight run carries meaning. Because the honeycomb hangs vertically, the direction of gravity serves as a reference point. If the bee waggles straight upward on the comb, she is signaling that the food source lies in the direction of the sun. If she angles her waggle 30 degrees to the left of vertical, the food source lies 30 degrees to the left of the sun's current position. The comb becomes a map. Direction becomes angle. But the dance encodes more than just direction. The duration of the waggle portion indicates distance. A longer waggle run signals a more distant food source. A shorter waggle indicates something closer. Researchers have measured these durations and found consistent relationships between time spent waggling and actual flight distance, often calibrated in fractions of a second. Distance becomes duration. Other bees gather around the dancer, touching her body with their antennae. In the darkness of the hive, vision is limited. Instead, they rely on vibration and contact. As the dancer waggles, vibrations travel through the wax comb. The followers sense these tiny tremors through their legs. They also detect the scent of the flowers carried on the returning bee's body. The message is layered. Angle relative to gravity signals direction relative to the sun. Duration signals distance. Scent signals the type of flower. Together, these cues allow other workers to leave the hive and fly toward the same patch of blossoms. The system also adjusts with time. The sun moves slowly across the sky during the day. Bees account for this movement. If a food source remains available for hours, the returning forager adjusts the angle of her dance to reflect the sun's new position. Experiments have shown that bees maintain an internal clock, allowing them to compensate for the sun's shifting arc, even if they cannot see it directly. Inside the hive, this dance repeats many times. A particularly rich nectar source may inspire several foragers to perform dances in nearby areas of the comb. Other bees compare these signals, often choosing to follow the most vigorous or frequent dances. In this way, the colony allocates its workforce efficiently, directing more bees toward abundant flowers. The dance is not random motion. It is a symbolic representation of space. scientists first decoded the waggle dance in the 20th century, confirming through marked experiments that bees following a dance would travel in the indicated direction and distance. Artificial feeding stations placed at measured intervals helped reveal the precise relationship between waggle duration and flight length. Within the steady hum of the hive, this communication unfolds quietly. A bee loops, waggles, loops again. Others press close, absorbing direction through touch and vibration. Soon, a small group leaves the entrance, rising into open air, aligning their flight with the angle described moments earlier. Darkness holds geometry. Movement holds distance. The honeycomb becomes a shared coordinate system suspended in warm air. Outside, fields stretch under the sun. Inside, space is translated into motion against wax. And as bees leave the hive guided by these encoded angles, their navigation continues beyond the dance itself, shaped by additional systems that help them orient across open land and return with steady accuracy. As those foragers rise from the hive entrance, guided first by the waggle dance, the open landscape becomes their map. Flight across a meadow is not random drifting. It is oriented, adjusted, and remembered. One of the bee's primary navigation tools is the sun. Even when clouds soften the sky, bees can detect the sun's position indirectly. By sensing polarized light patterns, they infer where the sun must be. During clear conditions, the sun itself acts as a compass point. A bee measures the angle between its body and the sun's position, maintaining a consistent heading as it travels. The bee also carries an internal sense of time. Because the sun moves gradually across the sky throughout the day, a fixed angle would become inaccurate if not adjusted. Bees account for this shift. Experiments have shown that if bees are trained to visit a feeder at a certain direction and time of day, they can compensate for the sun's movement hours later. Their internal clock works alongside their visual system, but the sky is not their only guide. Bees learn landmarks. During early flights, young foragers perform short orientation flights near the hive entrance. They hover, circle, and face the hive repeatedly, imprinting the appearance of nearby trees, rocks, and structures. These flights are brief and cautious. Over time, the bee builds a memory of the surrounding terrain. Landmark recognition allows bees to refine their path. If wind shifts or obstacles appear, they adjust using familiar visual cues. Studies tracking bees with tiny transponders have shown that they often follow habitual routes between the hive and reliable food sources. These routes may curve gently around obstacles or align with tree lines and hedges. Distance is also measured internally. Bees estimate how far they have traveled based on optic flow, the apparent motion of the ground passing beneath them. When flying low over textured surfaces, the movement of patterns below provides a sense of speed and distance. In experiments where bees flew through tunnels lined with repeating stripes, altering the visual pattern changed their perception of distance, affecting how they performed the waggle dance afterward. The landscape, then, becomes part of their measurement system. There is also evidence suggesting that bees may sense Earth's magnetic field. Some studies indicate that magnetic particles in their bodies could provide subtle orientation cues, particularly inside the dark hive. While this ability is still being researched, behavioral experiments suggest that magnetic fields can influence dance orientation, when other cues are limited. Together, these systems create layered navigation. Sun position provides a broad directional anchor. Polarized light supports that anchor when direct sunlight is obscured. Landmarks refine the path locally. Optic flow estimates distance. Internal timekeeping adjusts for daily change. And yet, the bee's brain remains smaller than a sesame seed. Within fewer than 1 million neurons, circuits integrate light, motion, scent, and memory into coordinated flight. Experiments have shown that bees can learn simple patterns and remember the locations of food sources over several days. They do not rely on a single cue. They combine multiple signals to stay oriented. Flight often extends several kilometers from the hive. Some honeybees have been recorded traveling 5 kilometers or more in search of food. Despite this distance, they return with precision, entering the hive entrance confidently, even among hundreds of other bees. The return is not frantic. It is steady. A bee approaches, slows, aligns with the entrance, and disappears inside, carrying nectar or pollen. Shortly after, she may perform a waggle dance, translating her journey into movement for others to follow. Across open fields, over fences, through shifting wind, the navigation continues quietly. No maps are drawn. No external instruments are used. The cues are embedded in light, terrain, and time. As the sun lowers toward the horizon, angles shift again. Flights shorten. Activity slows. Inside the hive, warmth remains near 35 degrees Celsius. Air moves gently through narrow spaces. While foragers navigate outside, others maintain the interior environment with equal precision. The colony depends on both systems, orientation beyond the hive and regulation within it. And as day fades and temperatures begin to drop, attention turns toward the steady control of heat and airflow that keeps the living system stable through change. As the sun lowers and outside air cools, the focus shifts inward again. Within the hive, temperature is not left to chance. Honeybee colonies maintain the brood area at approximately 35 degrees Celsius. This temperature is not arbitrary. It is the narrow range in which developing larvae grow properly. If it drops too low, development slows and deformities can occur. If it rises too high, proteins can break down and brood can die. The hive is a living climate system. On warm days, especially during peak summer, internal temperatures can rise quickly. Thousands of bees moving, processing nectar, and clustering together generate heat. To prevent overheating, workers begin to fan their wings. Fanning is deliberate. Bees position themselves near the hive entrance and along interior passageways. They face inward or outward depending on airflow needs, and beat their wings rapidly without lifting off. This creates a steady current of air through the hive. Warm air is drawn out. Cooler air flows in. The sound becomes slightly sharper when many bees fan at once. This airflow also assists in nectar processing. As water evaporates from open honey cells, moving air speeds the reduction in moisture. Temperature control and honey production work together. On extremely hot days, bees may collect water. Foragers gather droplets from puddles or moist soil and return to the hive. They deposit the water on surfaces inside. As it evaporates, it cools the surrounding air. similar to the way sweat cools skin. The combination of fanning and evaporation helps stabilize internal conditions. When temperatures drop, the strategy reverses. During cool evenings or seasonal change, bees cluster together near the brood nest. They press closely, forming a dense mass. Those on the outside of the cluster create an insulating layer. Those inside vibrate their flight muscles without flying. This muscle vibration generates heat. It is similar to shivering in mammals. By activating their thoracic muscles, bees raise their body temperature and warm the cluster. The heat spreads outward through contact. The wax comb absorbs and radiates warmth. In winter, when outside temperatures may fall far below freezing, this clustering behavior becomes essential. The colony contracts into a tight sphere around stored honey and the queen. The outer layer of bees forms a protective shell. Inside, temperatures remain much higher than outside air, often near 20 to 30 degrees Celsius, even in cold conditions. If brood is present, the core temperature rises closer to 35 degrees. Bees do not remain fixed in position within the cluster. They rotate. Individuals on the colder outer surface gradually move inward, while warmer bees from the center move outward. This rotation prevents any single bee from becoming too cold. The cluster shifts slowly across comb surfaces as honey stores are consumed. Airflow remains controlled even in winter. Small openings allow moisture to escape. Excess moisture can be dangerous in cold weather, as condensation may drip and chill the cluster. The hive must balance warmth with ventilation. The structure of the comb supports this regulation. Parallel sheets create channels through which air can move. The spacing between combs allows bees to adjust their density depending on temperature. If conditions warm briefly during winter sunlight, the cluster may loosen slightly, expanding across nearby cells. All of this regulation happens without central command. Each bee responds to local temperature cues. If it feels warmth drop below a threshold, it vibrates its muscles. If it senses heat rising, it joins the fanning effort. These small individual responses add up to stable internal conditions. Researchers using thermal cameras have observed distinct heat patterns inside active hives. The brood area glows warmer than surrounding comb. During fanning, airflow can be traced from entrance to exit. The hive breathes in slow cycles, expanding and contracting with seasonal shifts. Outside, wind may move unpredictably. Inside, stability is maintained through collective effort. Heat, airflow, moisture, all are balanced carefully. The same bodies that navigate kilometers of open field also regulate temperature within centimeters of wax. The colony is not only a system of communication and construction, it is a system of thermodynamics. And when spring returns and nectar flows increase, this internal stability allows the colony to expand once more, sometimes growing large enough that a portion must leave to begin again elsewhere. As spring deepens and nectar becomes abundant, the hive begins to feel crowded. Combs fill with honey. Brood areas expand. The population rises. When conditions are strong and space becomes limited, the colony prepares for something remarkable. It prepares to divide. Swarming is the natural way a honeybee colony reproduces. It is not the reproduction of individual bees, but of the colony itself. One hive becomes two. The process begins quietly. Worker bees construct special queen cells along the edges of the comb. These cells are larger and hang vertically, shaped like small peanuts. Inside each one, a fertilized egg is placed and fed royal jelly continuously. This exclusive diet transforms the larva into a potential queen rather than a worker. As these new queens develop, the original queen reduces her egg laying. Workers may limit her feeding slightly, causing her body weight to drop. This makes her more capable of flight. Normally, a mature queen rarely leaves the hive. During swarming season, she prepares to travel. On a warm day, often when the air is calm and flowers are plentiful, the swarm begins. Roughly half of the colony leaves with the old queen. Thousands of worker bees pour out of the hive entrance in a swirling cloud. The sound grows louder as wings fill the air. Yet the movement is not chaotic. It is coordinated. The swarm does not travel far at first. Instead, the bees gather on a nearby branch, fence post, or other surface. They cluster tightly around the queen, forming a living ball. From a distance, it may look like a dark, hanging mass. Up close, it hums softly with warmth and vibration. This temporary cluster can remain for hours or even a few days. During this time, scout bees leave to search for a new nesting site. Scouts inspect hollow trees, cavities in buildings, or other protected spaces. When a scout finds a promising location, she returns to the cluster and performs a waggle dance on the surface of the living mass. Yes, the waggle dance happens here too. Multiple scouts may propose different sites. Dances vary in enthusiasm. Other scouts visit these locations, evaluate them, and return with their own dances. Gradually, through repeated signaling and comparison, the swarm reaches a consensus. Once agreement forms, the cluster warms and begins to move. The bees lift into the air together, guided by scouts toward the chosen site. Upon arrival, they begin building new comb immediately. Because the swarm carries honey in their bodies before departure, they have fuel to produce wax and construct the first sheets of comb. Meanwhile, inside the original hive, the new queen cells continue developing. After the old queen departs, the remaining workers tend to the emerging virgin queens. Often, only one will survive. In some cases, virgin queens may fight until a single queen remains. Once mature, she takes her mating flight, continuing the cycle. Swarming is both an ending and a beginning. The original colony reduces in size but retains its location and resources. The new swarm establishes itself elsewhere, expanding the presence of honeybees across the landscape. From a human perspective, a swarm may seem sudden. From the colony's perspective, it is a measured response to abundance and space limitations. Swarming typically occurs in late spring or early summer, when nectar is plentiful and the weather is stable. It ensures that genetic lines spread and that population density does not overwhelm a single hive. After a swarm departs, the original hive becomes quieter for a time. Fewer workers move across the comb. Brood rearing slows until the new queen begins laying eggs. Gradually, population rises again. In fields and forests, swarms settle into hollow trees, under eaves, or in natural cavities. Wild colonies may thrive without human management, adapting to local conditions. One colony becomes two. One cluster divides into separate rhythms. What was once a single humming center now exists in multiple locations, each maintaining its own warmth, structure, and communication. And beyond the familiar honeybee hive, countless other bee species live different lives entirely, many without queens, combs, or swarms, working quietly in ways less visible but equally vital. Beyond the familiar wooden hive and the ordered sheets of honeycomb, there is a much wider world of bees. Honeybees are only one branch of a vast and varied family. Across the globe, scientists have identified more than 20,000 bee species. They live on every continent except Antarctica. Some are large and fuzzy. Others are small enough to rest unnoticed on a fingertip. Many do not live in hives at all. Most bee species are solitary. A solitary bee does not belong to a colony with thousands of workers and a single queen. Instead, each female builds and provisions her own nest. She gathers pollen and nectar, lays eggs, seals the chamber, and leaves her offspring to develop without further care. There is no waggle dance, no large wax comb, no swarm dividing in spring. One example is the mason bee. Mason bees often nest in hollow stems or small holes in wood. The female gathers mud to create partitions between brood chambers. Inside each chamber, she places a mixture of pollen and nectar, lays a single egg, and seals it off with mud. Each chamber becomes a self-contained nursery. Ground nesting bees are also common. Many species dig tunnels into bare soil. The entrance may be only a few millimeters wide. Beneath the surface, the tunnel branches into small cells where pollen provisions are stored. To someone walking across a meadow, these nests are nearly invisible. Yet beneath the soil, quiet activity continues. Bumblebees offer another variation. Unlike honeybees, bumblebee colonies are much smaller, often containing only a few dozen to a few hundred individuals. They may nest underground in abandoned rodent burrows or in sheltered grass clumps. Their comb is less orderly, composed of wax pots rather than uniform hexagonal sheets. Bumblebees also regulate temperature differently. Because they are larger and more insulated with dense hair, they can fly in cooler temperatures than honeybees. They warm their flight muscles by vibrating them before takeoff, raising their thoracic temperature enough to lift into cold morning air. This ability allows them to pollinate early spring flowers when other bees remain inactive. Carpenter bees carve into wood. Leafcutter bees slice neat circles from leaves to line their nests. Sweat bees are drawn to moisture on human skin, attracted by salt. Each species occupies a slightly different niche, shaped by habitat, climate, and available plants. Not all bees produce honey in the way honeybees do. Some species store small amounts of nectar, but most do not accumulate large reserves. Instead, they gather just enough to support their own offspring. The large-scale honey storage seen in honeybees is tied to their social structure and need to survive winter as a colony. Social behavior also varies. Some species are fully solitary. Others are primitively social, with small groups of females sharing a nest, but without strict queen worker divisions. A few, like honeybees and certain stingless bees, are highly social with complex organization. Stingless bees, found in tropical regions, form colonies and produce honey, but their comb structure and storage pots differ from those of honeybees. Their communication systems are less understood, but they also rely on scent trails and movement to guide others. Across this diversity, one trait remains constant: Bees gather pollen to provision their young. Their bodies are built for this task. Branched hairs trap pollen grains efficiently. Specialized leg structures carry loads back to nests. Even solitary bees contribute significantly to pollination in wild ecosystems. In many environments, native solitary bees are responsible for pollinating plants that honeybees visit less frequently. Some crops benefit greatly from the unique buzzing behavior of certain bees. Bumblebees, for example, perform buzz pollination. They grasp a flower and vibrate their bodies at specific frequencies, releasing pollen that would otherwise remain trapped inside the flower's structure. The world of bees is broader than a single hive. In forests, deserts, grasslands, and gardens, quiet nests rest beneath soil or within hollow stems. There are no large swarms here, no stacked wooden boxes, only individual mothers working methodically. From massive colonies of tens of thousands to solitary tunnels beneath a stone, bees adapt their lives to available space and season. And whether social or solitary, their foraging connects flowers across landscapes, creating an exchange that stretches far beyond any single nest or hive. Across fields, orchards, and wild meadows, a quiet exchange unfolds. A bee lands on a flower in search of nectar or pollen. In doing so, it carries something invisible yet powerful from one bloom to another. This is pollination. When a bee visits a flower, pollen grains cling to its body. As the bee moves to the next flower of the same species, some of that pollen brushes onto the flower's stigma, the receptive part of the plant's reproductive system. If the pollen is compatible, it grows a tiny tube down into the flower's ovary. Fertilization occurs. Seeds begin to form. Without this transfer, many plants cannot reproduce. Wind pollination works for some species, like grasses. But for countless flowering plants, animal pollinators are essential. Bees are among the most efficient of these pollinators because they deliberately gather pollen as food for their young. It is estimated that roughly 1/3 of global food crops depend, at least in part, on pollinators. Apples, blueberries, cucumbers, almonds, and many other fruits and vegetables rely on insect pollination. In large agricultural systems, managed honeybee colonies are often transported to fields during blooming seasons to ensure adequate pollination. Almond production provides a striking example. In regions where almond orchards stretch across vast areas, millions of honeybee colonies are brought in each spring. Almond trees bloom for only a short period. During that window, bees transfer pollen between blossoms, allowing nuts to develop later in the season. Without sufficient pollination, yields drop significantly. Pollination does more than increase quantity. Cross-pollination between different plants of the same species increases genetic diversity. Greater diversity often means stronger, more resilient plant populations. This diversity supports long-term adaptation to pests, diseases, and climate shifts. Wild ecosystems depend on this exchange as well. Many native plants have evolved alongside specific bee species. The shape of a flower may match the tongue length of a particular bee. Some flowers open only during certain times of day, aligning with the foraging patterns of their pollinators. This coevolution creates intricate relationships across landscapes. In meadows, forests, and wetlands, Bees move between blossoms in patterns shaped by scent and color. Ultraviolet markings guide them. Floral scents draw them closer. Nectar rewards encourage return visits. Each visit carries pollen from one plant to another, connecting individuals into a larger reproductive network. Pollination also supports animals beyond bees and plants. Fruits and seeds formed through successful pollination feed birds, mammals, and insects. Entire food webs rest on the foundation of flowering plant reproduction. When pollination rates decline, ripple effects move outward through ecosystems. Different bee species contribute in different ways. Honeybees are generalists, visiting a wide variety of plants. Bumblebees can perform buzz pollination, releasing pollen from tightly closed flowers, like tomatoes and blueberries. Solitary bees often specialize, focusing on specific plant groups and providing efficient pollination for those species. Timing matters. Early spring bees pollinate early blooming flowers. Summer species overlap with peak blooming periods. In this way, pollination extends across seasons, maintaining continuity in plant reproduction. The exchange is mutual. Bees gather nectar and pollen for nourishment. Plants receive pollen transfer that enables fertilization. Neither partner plans the arrangement. It unfolds naturally through repeated contact. Across agricultural fields, orchards, and wild habitats, billions of such interactions occur daily during blooming seasons. A bee lands. Pollen adheres. The bee lifts off. Another flower receives the grains. Seeds begin forming silently within petals. From a distance, a flowering field may appear still. Up close, it hums with motion. Each movement connects plants across space. Each landing carries possibility. The scale of this exchange stretches beyond any single hive or nest. It extends into global food systems, natural ecosystems, and the resilience of plant communities. From the small dusting of pollen on a bee's leg grows fruit, seed, and renewal. And as this network spreads across landscapes, it reveals how deeply woven bees are into the structure of life itself, shaping not only individual plants, but entire ecological systems that depend on their steady, rhythmic flight. Across orchards, forests, gardens, and grasslands, the movement of bees forms part of something larger. It is not just a relationship between insect and flower. It is a web. When a bee carries pollen from one bloom to another, fruit begins to form. Seeds develop inside protective layers. Those fruits and seeds do not remain on the plant forever. Birds eat them. Small mammals gather them. Even insects rely on the abundance that follows successful pollination. A single act of pollen transfer can ripple outward. If a wild apple tree is well pollinated, it produces more fruit. Those apples feed deer, birds, and smaller forest animals. The seeds spread through movement and digestion, planting future trees. Shade patterns change. Soil moisture shifts. New plants take root beneath the canopy. Pollination shapes landscapes over time. Without consistent pollination, many flowering plants would produce fewer seeds. Over seasons and years, plant populations could shrink. With fewer plants, food sources decline for animals that depend on them. This can affect migration patterns, nesting success, and predator-prey balance. Bees support biodiversity quietly. In diverse ecosystems, many plant species bloom at different times. Early spring flowers depend on early foragers. Late summer blooms rely on bees active in warmer months. Because bees move among different plant species, they help maintain genetic diversity within plant populations. Cross-pollination increases variation. When pollen travels between separate plants rather than within the same plant, genetic mixing occurs. Greater genetic diversity often means stronger resilience to disease, drought, and environmental change. In this way, bees indirectly strengthen plant communities against stress. Grasslands, woodlands, and wetlands all contain flowering plants that depend on pollinators. In tropical forests, specialized bees pollinate specific orchids. In temperate regions, wildflowers depend on solitary bees and bumblebees. Even urban gardens become small nodes in a broader ecological network. The connection is not limited to food crops. Many native plants that are not grown for agriculture still rely on bees. These plants support insects, birds, and mammals in complex chains of interaction. Remove one layer, and others shift. Bees also influence the timing of plant reproduction. Flowering cycles often align with bee activity. If blooming occurs when pollinators are scarce, seed production may decline. When bees and flowering schedules remain synchronized, ecosystems remain stable. Scientists refer to these connections as interdependence. No single species operates in isolation. The bee depends on flowers for nectar and pollen. Flowers depend on bees for reproduction. Animals depend on plants for food and shelter. The system holds together through countless small exchanges. In agricultural systems, this interdependence becomes visible in harvest yields. Farms that maintain nearby wildflower strips often support healthier pollinator populations. Diverse landscapes provide continuous food sources across seasons, helping bees remain active and stable. In turn, crops benefit from improved pollination. Even soil health connects to this web. As plant diversity increases, root systems vary. Soil organisms thrive. Water retention improves. The presence of bees, through their support of flowering plants, indirectly shapes the ground itself. From a distance, a meadow may appear still. Yet beneath that stillness, pollen moves. Seeds form. Animals feed. New growth emerges the following year. The web is delicate but persistent. Each bee flight may seem small, each flower visit brief, but multiplied across thousands of individuals and millions of blossoms, the impact spreads outward through entire ecosystems. The strength of this interdependence lies in repetition. Flight after flight, bloom after bloom, season after season. And while this network has functioned for thousands of years, it is not immune to change. Subtle imbalances can shift the pattern, placing pressure on both bees and the systems they support, altering the rhythm that has long held steady. The web of exchange continues. Yet even stable systems experience pressure. In recent decades, beekeepers and scientists have observed changes within honeybee colonies and wild bee populations. These changes are not always sudden. Often, they appear as gradual imbalances, subtle shifts in survival, reproduction, or health. One significant pressure on honeybee colonies is a parasite known as the Varroa mite. Varroa destructor is a small reddish-brown mite that attaches to both adult bees and developing brood. It feeds on the bee's fat body tissue, weakening the individual and spreading viruses in the process. Because the mite reproduces inside brood cells, especially drone cells, it can increase rapidly if left unmanaged. Infested colonies often show signs of stress. Wings may appear deformed due to viral infection. Worker lifespan can shorten. Over time, untreated infestations may lead to colony collapse. In managed hives, beekeepers monitor and control mite levels through various methods, including organic acids and selective breeding. Selective breeding has become one path of adaptation. Some honeybee lines show behaviors that help limit mite reproduction. For example, certain bees exhibit hygienic behavior, detecting and removing infected brood from cells before mites can complete their life cycle. By encouraging these traits, beekeepers aim to increase colony resilience. Beyond parasites, habitat fragmentation affects both managed and wild bees. As landscapes become more urbanized or dominated by single crops, flowering diversity can decline. Large areas of monoculture may provide abundant blooms for a short time, followed by long periods with little forage. Bees benefit from varied flowering plants that bloom across seasons. When natural habitats shrink or become separated, nesting sites may become scarce. Ground nesting bees rely on undisturbed soil. Cavity nesting bees depend on hollow stems or wood. Changes in land use can reduce these resources. In response, some conservation efforts include planting wildflower corridors and preserving natural areas. Pesticide exposure presents another challenge. Certain pesticides, particularly systemic ones that move through plant tissues, can appear in nectar and pollen. While many are applied with the intention of controlling crop pests, sublethal exposure may affect bee navigation, learning, or immune function. Research continues to evaluate how different compounds influence bee health over time. Not all impacts are uniform. Some regions report stable or even increasing managed honeybee colony numbers due to careful management and breeding. However, wild bee populations in certain areas show declines linked to habitat loss and environmental stresses. Climate patterns also influence bee activity. Shifts in temperature and seasonal timing can affect flowering periods. If blooms occur earlier or later than usual, synchronization between bees and plants may shift. Some species adapt by adjusting emergence timing. Others may struggle if change happens too quickly. Adaptation, however, is part of the bee's long history. Over millions of years, bees have survived ice ages, climate shifts, and geographic changes. Behavioral flexibility allows colonies to adjust foraging patterns. Genetic variation supports resilience in changing conditions. Researchers and farmers increasingly explore supportive practices. Planting diverse flowering strips, reducing unnecessary pesticide use, and encouraging habitat restoration can support pollinator health. Urban gardens and roadside plantings also contribute small but meaningful resources. Within the hive, bees continue their daily cycles. Foragers leave at sunrise. Nurses tend brood. Fanners regulate temperature. The presence of stress does not stop the rhythm entirely. It modifies it. The balance between pressure and adaptation remains ongoing. Parasites evolve. Bees respond. Landscapes shift. Management practices change. In the larger ecological web, adjustments ripple through seasons. And as summer fades into autumn, the colony prepares once again for its annual contraction, shifting from expansion to conservation as part of a repeating seasonal rhythm that has shaped bee life for generations. As late summer light begins to soften, the rhythm of the colony shifts. Bee life follows the calendar closely. In early spring, when the first blossoms open, activity increases quickly. The queen begins laying more eggs as pollen and nectar become available. Nurse bees feed growing larvae. The brood nest expands outward from the center of the comb. Population rises steadily. Spring is a time of acceleration. Young workers emerge daily. Foragers explore newly blooming trees and wildflowers. Honey stores from the previous winter are gradually replaced with fresh nectar. If resources are abundant, the colony may grow large enough to prepare for swarming, dividing into two as described earlier. By summer, activity reaches its peak. Fields and gardens are filled with blossoms. Foragers leave the hive in waves throughout the day, returning with heavy pollen baskets and full honey stomachs. Inside, workers process nectar continuously. The sound of fanning wings may be constant as evaporation and temperature regulation continue. At this stage, the colony may contain tens of thousands of individuals. Brood rearing remains high. New workers replace those whose wings have worn thin from foraging. Honey stores increase rapidly when nectar flows are strong. Summer is also a time of high energy demand. Flight muscles work continuously. Communication through waggle dances remains frequent. The hive interior stays warm and active well into the evening. As days gradually shorten and flowers become less abundant, the tone changes. In early autumn, nectar sources decline in many regions. Foragers travel farther to find remaining blooms. Brood rearing slows. The queen reduces her egg-laying rate in response to decreased resources. Autumn is a time of contraction. Worker bees focus on consolidating honey stores. Pollen gathering decreases as fewer flowers bloom. Drones, if present, are expelled to conserve resources. The hive becomes quieter compared to the intensity of summer. Winter preparation begins before cold fully arrives. The colony ensures that sufficient honey is capped and stored. Bees begin to form tighter clusters at night as temperatures drop. The population decreases naturally as summer workers reach the end of their lifespan. When winter settles in, flight activity nearly stops in colder climates. Bees remain inside the hive, forming the winter cluster described earlier. The cluster moves slowly across honey stores, consuming energy to maintain warmth. There are no foraging trips, no waggle dances, only steady vibration of flight muscles and careful conservation. The queen continues laying eggs at a much lower rate, sometimes pausing entirely during the coldest periods. The colony's survival depends on maintaining adequate honey reserves and stable internal temperature. In warmer climates, winter may be mild enough to allow occasional short flights on warmer days. In colder regions, months may pass with no external activity at all. As late winter approaches and light begins to lengthen, subtle changes begin again. The queen increases egg production gradually. Workers sense the returning abundance of light and temperature. Early pollen sources such as willow or crocus may appear, offering the first fresh protein after months of reliance on stored food. the cycle restarts. Expansion follows contraction. Abundance follows scarcity. Warmth rises after cold. The annual rhythm is predictable, but not identical each year. Weather patterns, floral availability, and local conditions influence timing and intensity. Yet the overall structure remains steady. Spring growth, summer peak, autumn contraction, winter survival. Within this cycle, generations overlap. Winter bees give way to spring workers. Spring workers raise summer foragers. Summer bees prepare the colony for autumn transition. The hive breathes in and out across months, from bustling expansion to quiet cluster, from open flights across fields to stillness in cold air. This repeating pattern has shaped bee life for millions of years, long before written records began. And alongside these natural cycles, human history has unfolded in quiet partnership with bees, drawn to their honey, wax, and steady presence. Before written records, before cities rose or fields were ploughed in straight lines, humans were already aware of bees. The connection is ancient. In a cave in Spain, there is an image painted roughly 8,000 years ago. It shows a human figure climbing toward a wild hive, reaching into it while bees circle around. This is one of the earliest known depictions of honey hunting. Even in that distant time, people valued what bees produced. Honey was rare sweetness in a world without refined sugar. For early human communities, honey provided energy and flavor. It could be eaten directly, mixed with grains, or fermented into early forms of drink. Because honey resists spoilage, it could be stored longer than many other foods. Its natural stability made it valuable in times when preservation methods were limited. As civilizations developed, beekeeping began to move from wild gathering to deliberate management. In ancient Egypt, records and carvings show organized beekeeping along the Nile River. Clay hives were stacked horizontally, and beekeepers used smoke to calm bees while harvesting honey. Honey was offered in religious rituals and placed in tombs as part of burial practices. Beeswax also became important. Wax could be melted and shaped into candles, providing light long after sunset. It was used to seal containers, preserving food and drink. In art and metalworking, wax played a role in casting techniques, where wax models were formed and then replaced with molten metal. Across Greece and Rome, honey was used in cooking and medicine. It sweetened foods, preserved fruits, and served as an ingredient in remedies. Without access to refined sugar, honey remained one of the primary sweeteners across much of the ancient world. In many cultures, bees symbolized industry and cooperation. Their organized colonies, steady work, and collective behavior inspired metaphors in philosophy and literature. Writers observed the hive as a model of structured society, with each member contributing to a larger whole. Beekeeping techniques gradually evolved. In medieval Europe, woven straw skeps were common. These dome-shaped hives housed colonies, but required the destruction of comb to harvest honey. Over time, improvements in hive design allowed for removable frames, enabling honey to be collected without damaging the entire colony. This innovation supported more sustainable beekeeping practices. By the 19th century, movable frame hives became widespread. Beekeepers could inspect brood, manage swarming, and harvest honey more efficiently. This development increased honey production and allowed closer observation of bee behavior. Honey continued to serve practical purposes. It was used as a preservative, a sweetener, and sometimes as a wound dressing due to its antimicrobial properties. Beeswax remained valuable for candles and sealing documents. Even in modern times, bees remain woven into daily life. Honey is found in kitchens worldwide. Beeswax appears in cosmetics, polishes, and specialty products. Managed colonies are transported to pollinate crops that support global food systems. The partnership between humans and bees is built on mutual exchange. Humans provide protection from predators and harsh weather. Bees provide honey, wax, and pollination services that benefit agriculture. Yet the connection goes deeper than material exchange. For thousands of years, the steady hum of bees has accompanied farming, gardening, and seasonal rhythms. Honey gathering marked times of abundance. Wax candles illuminated dark interiors. Hives stood at the edges of villages and fields. Across centuries, people observed bees carefully. They watched swarms form. They noted seasonal cycles. They adapted their practices to align with bee behavior rather than force it. From cave paintings to modern apiaries, the presence of bees has remained constant. Their small bodies move across flowers just as they did in ancient meadows. The hexagonal comb still forms. The queen still lays. Workers still fan warm air across nectar. Human history and bee history have overlapped for millennia. And as evening approaches once more, both hive and human settlement grow quieter, returning to stillness after the activity of the day, while the processes within the colony continue, whether anyone is watching or not. The evening air grows softer now. Across fields and gardens, the last foragers return. Their wings, which carried them across distances, measured in sunlight and memory, slow as they approach the hive entrance. One by one, they disappear inside. Outside, flowers begin to close. Inside, warmth remains steady. The comb holds honey thickened by air and time. Pollen rests in compact layers near the brood nest. The queen moves slowly across the wax, placing eggs into empty cells. Workers settle into quieter tasks. The hum lowers, not to silence, but to a softer rhythm. Bees do not stop when the light fades. Their metabolism slows slightly as temperature drops. Activity shifts inward. Fanning becomes less urgent. The cluster grows denser. Heat is shared through contact. The hive becomes a small pocket of stability in the cooling night. Above, the sky darkens. Below, within hexagonal chambers, life continues in steady cycles. Larvae grow. Honey rests beneath wax caps. Signals pass through touch and vibration rather than light. Across forests and farmland, in hollow trees and wooden boxes, in soil tunnels and grass-lined nests, similar quiet settles. Some bees rest within clusters. Some solitary mothers remain sealed inside their underground chambers. Some winter bees prepare for months of stillness. And yet, despite their size, their presence reaches far beyond the hive walls. It is often said that bees are among the most important living beings on Earth, not because they are loud or visible from a distance, but because so much depends on their steady movement between flowers, fruits, seeds, fields, forests, birds and mammals, crops and wild meadows. Their work is small in scale, but vast in consequence. A single landing on a blossom can begin a chain that ends in fruit months later. A single colony can support the flowering of entire fields. Quietly, consistently, bees shape landscapes and food systems alike. Now, as night deepens, their wings rest. The hive holds its warmth. The comb holds its stores. And somewhere beyond the darkened petals and cooling air, tomorrow's flowers wait, ready once again for the soft return of a small humming presence that carries more weight in the world than its size would ever suggest.